Now that our background layers are dry, it's time to add some more layers. So I'm going to need all of the supplies I had on day one of printmaking, but a few additional things like my stencils. I'm going to need all of those. And I'm going to need a paintbrush because that's what I'm going to use on the stencils. I'm going to need a water container filled about halfway with water so I can clean my brush. I'm going to need to make sure that I have my rag from my cubby. And then I might want some things for texture, so some string maybe or some bubble wrap. And you can share those at your table. So I'm going to get my workstation set up with my newspaper and my brayer and all of my things. I'm going to choose the first background to start with, and I'm going to remember to use that 80-20 ratio. So if my background is primarily red violets, I'm going to stick with the red violet family for the first layer that I use here. I'm going to center my jelly plate on my white piece of paper so that my second print lines up in the same spot. And for this second layer, I'm going to use some shades. Now, one of the things I want you to experiment with is working light to dark or dark to light. You'll be able to experiment with, lots of different approaches to building your layers. Just make sure you clean that brayer off. After you roll your color on, remember you just kind of want a nice thin layer of paint. And I'm going to experiment with the negative shapes of my stencils. And I personally like to think about, creating asymmetrical kinds of compositions, but however you want to use the space is totally up to you. I'm going to experiment with some string. Anything that I place down is going to block the paint, so it's going to create a negative kind of relief. I'm going to line my paper up, gently press down, and rub in a kind of a circular motion, making sure that I transfer all of that paint onto my paper before I lift it off. And you can see here the result. It's pretty cool. So where I had that string, you can see that sort of background layer. Now, you need to let your stencils dry before you use them again. You'll have some paint left on your jelly plate, and you could make a second print with that by rolling another color on top. Just make sure you spray it first with your spray bottle. Allow that print to dry before you move on to the second layer. So for the second layer, again, I'm going to stay in the same color family because I'm thinking 80-20. So for this layer, I'm going to do stamps only, stamps of your choice. And I'm going to paint color directly onto the stamp. Make sure you're painting it onto the gessoed side of your stamp because we don't want it to get stuck. And then I'm going to press the stamp directly onto my print. Again, make sure that the print is totally dry or your stamp will stick. Now you can press onto the stamp with a piece of paper to just ensure that you get a pretty good print. There's a lot of texture on my stamps because I've used them so many times, so my print is a little bit on the faint side. I like to overlap with my stamps. You should definitely experiment with, how you use your space. And you can use the positive or the negative with any of these layers. Clean your brush off thoroughly once you're done, and then dry it off on your rag. Now, once that's dried, I'm going to use the opposite color from my color harmony family, right? So now I'm going to switch to my yellow-green for this final round, and that will give me my 80-20. And I am going to just put a few touches of that color around where I want them. Now, if your stamp comes off kind of faint, you can use your brush to just fill in a little bit if that's what you prefer. If you want the stamp to really look solid and opaque, then you just use your brush and paint a little bit more to fill in. That's up to you. That's kind of a personal preference. So you can see here, I've got my 80-20, and I'm gonna wash my brush. I'm gonna clean up, same as I did last time when I'm all done.